Two and one. Let me sure we're live. And we are. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Wolf. It's great to see all of you here. Very excited to be joined by Samson Mao here on the podcast. Long time in the making. He's the CEO of Gen3. He's working with Aqua Bitcoin, Pixelmatic. He's working with a whole bunch of companies in the Bitcoin world. Super OG, been here a long, long time. Want to chat with him, get his thoughts on the current state of the world. It's kind of like an insane time to be alive. And I was just on a space yesterday, and he was like, all this stuff we've talked about in the last few weeks, it has literally been 3 weeks into the new year. He's like, it feels like we've been here and it's been in this industry for I feel like if we aged like 1,000 years kind of thing. But Samson, I'm very excited to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm good, Cade. It's great to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. So a question here, I'm going to throw you right into the fire. When historians look back like 50, 100 years from now, something like that, and they're zooming back to the first 15, 20 years of Bitcoin, what do you think Bitcoin's real legacy will be? What will some of the thoughts and the words that come to mind when they're looking back on this time for Bitcoin?
Well, I think the biggest thing that they'll look back on was how it was so obvious, but so many people missed it. I mean, right now, it's almost like you have this collective misunderstanding of Bitcoin on so many levels. Like, what is Bitcoin? A lot of people think it's a tech stock. A lot of people think it's a hedge. And you're still competing with in the minds of some, not us Bitcoiners, but in the minds of some, you're competing with all these different altcoins, which have some interesting feature or potential. And I think when historians look back, they're going to see, wow, it was all bullshit. Like everything was bullshit. And the trade was just to get Bitcoin before everyone else understood Bitcoin. And it's probably mirroring something that happened thousands of years ago as precious metals evolved into some form of money, right? You must have had people thinking, well, gold is great. And some people thinking, I don't know, pick some random metal, iron is great. And people promoting these different things. But it's probably cyclical. So we probably went through all of that before one metal emerged as the apex predator of that. And now you're having the same thing with Bitcoin and crypto, and even Bitcoin and everything else. But I think historians will look back simply and say, wow, Bitcoin was the apex predator. And it's just astonishing how confused people were in this 20-year gap when Bitcoin went from zero to $50 trillion market cap.
Yeah, you're probably right. It's interesting with the amount that like silver has run, like for example, like you mentioned the metals and stuff, and a lot of people are looking at it, and it's so funny where we're in spaces and like we got the guys like Eric Rice and Darkside, and these guys who have been in these markets for a long time. Some have been on Wall Street forever, and they're like, man, gold and silver have been the worst trade for literally ever. And then either people woke up, maybe there was price suppression for whatever reason, but now everyone comes in, they're like, God, it was so obvious, like silver at $10, silver 50. Well, of course it's running. And now they're like, now it has to be copper next. Like it must be this, and it must be this next one. And so it does seem like someone asked me, they're like, does the run in metals, like, does it make your confidence in Bitcoin more rocky? Does it make it more excited? And for me, I was like, well, it has to make it more ironed out. Like you have to get more excited because you're like, why else would these rocks in the earth be running if people are not saying, wait a minute, do I need to rethink my investing thesis here? Do I need to hold this rock? And why do I need to hold this rock? What about these companies that are supposed to have these earnings and things like that? It's starting to like change people's mindsets on how they look at investing. I'm also curious. So you have an extensive background working in the industry from Blockstream to Gen3 with Pixelmatic. You're working in the gaming world as well. I'm curious on how or if your view on Bitcoin in terms of just like the technical roadmap, has it changed at all in terms of scaling, in terms of privacy? Has it stayed the same since you found out about Bitcoin, or how do you think about it?
I think my views on Bitcoin have pretty much been more or less the same for the past decade, that it is the best asset we have. It is better than gold, better than anything else. And the need for it is only increasing. And the way to scale is in layers, using things like Liquid, like Lightning. And that privacy is always a critical dimension. So if you look at the Liquid network, it has privacy built in with confidential transactions and blinding. And that's something I saw right off the bat, like a decade ago, that this is going to become very important. And I think most people don't really realize that privacy is important. I think maybe in the last 6 months, there's been this narrative spun up that privacy is important, but it's been bastardized and it's twisted into like, okay, we need these centralized altcoins that have privacy, that have very low liquidity and very low adoption, and somehow that's going to fix the privacy problems that are that people think are in Bitcoin when they're not. So it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, and people will just have to learn that Bitcoin can do everything. I mean, even the programmability aspect, that was a major grift from the Ethereum side, right? And it's still a prevalent angle that is present in mainstream media, mainstream finance, and Wall Street, that, oh, Ethereum somehow programmable money and it's tackling a segment that Bitcoin isn't. But that's just false. Bitcoin can do everything. You can do it on layer 2s. You can do it with BitVM. You can do it with simplicity on Liquid. It's just the world doesn't understand yet. They think they think they're too clever. I believe it's sort of like the mid curve, right? They think I learned about this thing called Ethereum and has smart contracts, and they just read the popular narratives that it's able to do something Bitcoin isn't, and they don't go and dig deeper. They just believe it at face value, and I think that will just run out in due process, and people will learn that, okay, well, yeah, it's a centralized altcoin with some good marketing behind it, but doesn't actually solve a problem because the base of the technology is broken fundamentally. It's centralized, it's easily controlled, it can be rolled back if needed, it was pre-mined, it had no organic growth or birth. So yeah, it goes back to your first question, that it's kind of all a mess right now, that people don't understand Bitcoin, and historians will cut through that because hindsight is 2020. But your comment about metals is interesting. Like right now, it feels like a lot of Bitcoiners are frustrated or at a sort of a midlife crisis of sorts with Bitcoin.
Way to put it.
But I think it's just a lack of patience. Like, we think it's going to happen faster.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that metals, gold and silver, have been around for thousands of years. The level of normie understanding of these things is far superior and far simpler to grasp than Bitcoin. So it's normal that, like, our thesis is hard assets are critical and are important and are going to win the day because fiat is an abomination and should not be here. So that thinking is correct, but that thinking being distilled down to the masses, it's going to hit the metal guys first, the precious metal investors first, right? And that's exactly what happened. And I honestly think, like, they deserve to have their run. Like, as much as I dislike Peter Schiff, he's waited 50, 60 years.
He's a young man.
He was
like me when he first started getting in.
Let him have his moment in the sun before it's over. A lot of these metal investors, they've been waiting for this for at least 50 years. If you look at silver, the CAGR is what, 2% or something? Like, you're up 2% if you bought 50 years ago. Like, good for you. Like, you hung in there. And I think we just have to humor them and let them have their moment, because Bitcoin will take off, and it will take off in a far bigger way than metals has. So I posted yesterday, there's 2 major things that happened in the last 12 months, last year, that are super critical for Bitcoin. One is the breaking of the 4-year cycle, right? Like, that just eliminates that myth that people were believing, that it's going to follow this 4-year cycle in perpetuity forever. It's going to be a couple of years up and then one down and then again. But we broke that. And it means that anything can happen now. But the second one that's really important is the myth that Bitcoin is too big now as an asset class to have a big move. And that's thanks to the metals. So gold almost did a 2x, almost doubled its market cap. Silver did a 3.4x. And these are large asset classes, like the largest on the planet. And Bitcoin is, somewhere around the 2 trillion mark. And it definitely can do a bigger move than gold or silver, because gold and silver are largely captured or illiquid in the physical spot markets, right? Whereas Bitcoin is liquid in the in the paper markets, like trading ETFs, but it's also incredibly liquid at the spot market because it's just information that you can zip around the planet at the speed of light. So I think when Bitcoin runs, and Bitcoin will run, you're going to see a 10x, a 20x. And that's when all the gold investors are going to sit there with their jaws open in disbelief.
Mm. There are words like hyper Bitcoinization. I think so you say it. That people talk about. There's also, there are people who come from the big. Like I found Bitcoin. I heard about it first in college. I had a very. I wish it wasn't like this, but it was a very sketchy dude talking all sorts of sketchy stuff. And of course, Bitcoin was in that conversation. So my ears were turned off. Didn't really hear about it. And then I rediscovered it, I guess, around 2021 ish. Didn't really fully understand, honestly, probably till 2023, 2024. So it was like, I'm very new compared to like people who've been in the space for 10, 15 years, been stacking this entire time. And obviously the assets changed a lot. There are big players who probably have been in a lot longer than they've kind of let in on, like these big names that are now like these big banks and stuff. From like, there's just no way you finally just started getting in this year and like haven't been secretly stacking. And anyway, like, they got in, the ETFs got in. And now people have talked about Bitcoin becoming Wall Streetified or something like that. You've been around for a long time. Just tell me some of your thoughts on like how Bitcoin sort of evolved. Are you happy with it? Pleased with it? Was this inevitable? Like, how were you thinking about all this this adoption, I guess?
Well, I've always maintained that it is inevitable that banks and even countries will get into Bitcoin because they just want what is valuable. They cannot dictate what is valuable to the world. That is the crux of the fiat experiment, that they try to dictate that paper is valuable. And it was a gradual process that you kind of like slowly turn the heat on the pot and boil the frog. But they managed to get there. And the majority of the world does believe that paper, or even the virtualization of that paper in your bank account, is money. And I think that illusion is starting to shatter. But the point I'm trying to make is that these large centralized institutions cannot maintain that forever. Money is dictated by everybody in the world, right? We decide what is valuable. And while they can do it for some time, they can't continue that. So it's always been the case that banks and financial institutions, BlackRock and the like, are and will get into Bitcoin. Even JP Morgan is getting into Bitcoin now, right? And Jamie Dimon is probably not happy about that, or he's maintained a very good public face of disliking Bitcoin while promoting it internally, right? And that's also a thing that you can do too. Like you're kind of alluding to that maybe they're implementing a strategy and they don't want the public to catch on yet. So they take a negative public stance on Bitcoin while building out the infrastructure internally to manage and participate in the Bitcoin ecosystem. But I think that's another thing people have to think about, especially Bitcoiners, that you have to think adversarially, that everyone wants your Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is the most valuable asset in the world, then everyone's going to want to get it. And the only way to get it is to play some psychological game, unless they can, unless you're paper-handed, lettuce-handed, and really eager to sell to take a fiat profit, you're going to hold that asset, right? So the only way is to wage psychological warfare, and that can be done, through public statements or through market suppression of Bitcoin and keeping the price low to break your spirit. So I think you have to think adversarially, that everyone is running a psyop on you. All the big financial institutions, they want your Bitcoin, and they're going to tell you Bitcoin is bad to your face while they buy it from you when you sell it. But like Jan 3, we work on nation state Bitcoin adoption as well. And we also get some criticism like, why are you guys trying to get governments into Bitcoin? Well, again, if Bitcoin is valuable, just like gold is, everyone will want that asset, right? So financial institutions, nation states, they're all going to want it. The question is, how do they adopt it? And what types of laws are passed? And are they favorable or not favorable? And can they do it? Can they implement an adoption system that's better for everyone, and maybe break some of the surveillance mechanisms that are part of the financial system? Like the financial system has largely been captured and weaponized to surveil people too, right? Like it's almost, well, you have a hard application of social credit, but then you have a soft application of social credit too in the West. And I don't think people fully realize that, but Bitcoin can break that cycle and actually, restore a lot of the freedom and liberties that people should have in a modern society.
Yeah, I'm actually curious. I had a different question, but you brought up Jan 3 and the nation state adopting. I actually love for you to speak on that a little bit. That's a topic that 99.9999% of people can't really speak to, especially boots on the ground. Like you're in these conversations, you're hearing sort of these things that are being said in these rooms, and you're part of these discussions and strategy. I guess you can speak to anything really here, but like, where are we at? Are you pleased with where they're at? Are there any countries that you were surprised maybe haven't gotten as big of a start in this, or you'd like to see them do more? Are there countries that are kind of on the horizon that aren't being talked about as much? I'd love for you to speak on this a little bit.
Yeah, well, obviously the race to accumulate Bitcoin is accelerating. You're seeing that with the treasury companies, but also at the nation state level. And I think it's just much harder to do correctly at the nation state level, but also to get something moving. And I think the US is a good example of this. And cross comparing with Bhutan. So if you look at Bhutan, they kind of got into it accidentally. They just had excess hydropower and they started mining Bitcoin. And then suddenly ended up with like a couple thousand Bitcoin. And Bitcoin increased as an asset class, and suddenly they're sitting quite pretty. But I wouldn't say it was a very calculated thing. I think it was more something they just got into because they partnered with a mining company and started taking advantage of excess energy. But if you look at the more calculated initiatives, like in the U.S., even though President Trump has said that he wants to make the U.S. a Bitcoin superpower and crypto capital, they haven't made that much progress yet because it is very difficult for countries with a good balance of power, to put it, to pass laws and implement policy across the board, and especially something as big as like an SBR, right? And even within the US, it still sounded like for some time, it's still not very clear that were some government departments violating the executive order and selling Bitcoin intentionally or accidentally to defy the president. I don't know. But like passing the Bitcoin Act that Cynthia Lummis tabled, that's still ongoing. That would allow them to accumulate Bitcoin not budget neutrally, so actually going out and buying. But even the budget neutral accumulation hasn't really materialized yet too. So they could have sold off the crypto reserve and swapped that to Bitcoin, but I don't think that's happening yet either. But at the nation state level, everything is very difficult, and it's very difficult to get things passed when you have a good separation of power and controls in that country.
Yeah. Is there anyone that like comes to mind? So like there's like the people that everybody's kind of heard of at this point, like Cynthia Lummis. There's also people who are not exactly in government but are very public figures who go on, and they're like Brian Armstrong. He's on TV all the time. People talk to him. People know he's pushing policy and stuff like that. Is there anyone you've been? And maybe you don't. If you want to be like public about it, you can. You don't have to call anyone specific out. But if there is anyone specific that comes to mind where you're like, A+ job, or you're doing the best you could do in your kind of role in there. Does anyone come to mind in that sense?
I think there's a lot of good people doing good work in the US. I think Satoshi Action, Bitcoin Policy, even Coin Center, they're all doing good work educating and engaging with government. I don't want to say anyone's better than the other, but everyone's doing a pretty good job overall. For us, we're not that focused on the US because there's simply so many people engaged there. We have some contacts, some relationships, but we don't really push it. We are more focused on the rest of the world. Yep. And I think the rest of the world, in terms of Bitcoin adoption, there was a time, I think that maybe 2-3 years ago, there was a lot of interest from a lot of heads of state to talk about Bitcoin. And we did go out there and meet with them and talk with them, and all over LATAM. And since then, it's kind of fizzled out. I think it has a lot to do with Bitcoin price. It's like the meme is real. It's the guy sitting at the table with Bitcoin at 88K, and at 126K, and then everyone's lining up at the 126K line and ignoring the 89K line, right? It's really like that. When Bitcoin is doing well, there's a lot of interest, and when Bitcoin is down, there's not a lot of interest. But I think what we've done is we shifted our strategy a bit to less push for engagements with the heads of state, because what we found is it's not always the best channel. We can get the meeting, but then after the meeting, it kind of nothing happens, right? And you could say that's a lot. That happens a lot with a lot of governments. But what we're trying to do now is shift to initiating smaller projects on smaller scales with governments. So actually saying, we'll help you set everything up and do some Bitcoin project. And we think that is a better way to actually get real adoption. So right now we're talking with 2 countries about Bitcoin bonds, and we've been doing this for the past 6 months or so, and we'll see what happens. But actually getting a project greenlit that is smaller in scope and has widespread implications for Bitcoin is probably more beneficial than just getting a meeting with the head of state and taking a photo, and then things just don't happen after that.
Sure. Yeah, and after if you've been doing it for a while, you're like, okay, we got to change strategies here to see more specifically for results. Have you what has been the biggest needle, what moves the needle the most, I guess? And maybe the answer changes for you a little bit versus the people you work with. But what have you found to be the most effective strategies to get people to take Bitcoin more seriously? I know you mentioned that with price does honestly lead basically everything. Even we noticed it when we're posting on Wolf. We'll post some story that's kind of lit, kind of awesome, and nobody cares. And I'm like, okay, it's obviously because the price is down. You post some mediocre story that's probably not even real, but Bitcoin's at 123K, you're getting 500 retweets kind of thing. And it really is like that. We have guys on our team, one of our guys that comes to mind is Taj, Tropic Vibes on Twitter. And he does a lot of stuff talking about circular economies. He's from Jamaica. He brings up a lot of examples that in the United States, we don't really focus on as much. We kind of get we get really excited about the price. But he brings up an entirely different way to look at Bitcoin, but very real and probably more impactful for a lot of those people who are in some of these third world countries as well. He brings up those examples too. And so what have you found to be the most effective ways to talk about Bitcoin? Because I'm sure there are a lot of people, and it'll change, if you're speaking to your aunt at Thanksgiving and she's balling out and she's living in Florida kind of thing versus someone else you're speaking to. But what have you found to be the most effective?
I mean, you probably don't like the answer, but it's a little bit of everything. I don't think there's a silver bullet in terms of increasing Bitcoin adoption. If you look at historically what's happened, let's take El Salvador as an example. They've done a lot of interesting things, Bitcoin, making Bitcoin law, announcing Bitcoin City. There's a lot of announcements, and even their buy announcements. Nothing moves the needle, and it's really interesting because you would think it would, but it doesn't. And then if you look at the discourse at the Bitcoin conference with Trump on stage, RFK, Bobby Kennedy on stage, talking about Bitcoin, you would have thought that would have really moved the needle in terms of adoption and urgency for other countries, but it didn't. Yeah. And what we found is when we actually go out and engage with some of the government officials and we talk to them about some of these things, like what's happening in the US, they're kind of not really aware of the level of advancement that's there. And we kind of have to explain, okay, the US has legislation already for these things, A, B, and C, and you don't have that yet. You're not even discussing it yet. So you probably need to get further along on the adoption curve, because it's not so straightforward that you just decide to buy Bitcoin and buy it. You have to have the processes in place. You have to figure out how you're going to hold the asset as a government, and if you're going to have infrastructure built to hold the asset too, and where you're going to source the asset. But there's a lot of question marks for these countries, and they're not even at that stage yet. But the scary thing is, or the worrying thing that most people should be, well, if you're living in that country, is that the government is not really aware of the level of Bitcoin adoption happening elsewhere. And that's kind of where we're bridging that gap. It's almost like we're delivering one-on-one personalized podcast when we meet with heads of political parties and heads of government, that we're just telling them what's happening, and they ask a question and we answer. But as Bitcoiners, we're following the news. We're on X, we're on all the social media. Every little change, every blip, every tiny development, we're aware of it. But we have to understand that other people aren't. And we kind of need to
True.
repackage that into a condensed form at a very high level. But yeah, like there there should be a much higher rate of adoption in other countries, at least preparing legislation and preparing themselves. And we make some progress. Like in Taiwan, there's some progress happening there. We're working with JC Ko. He's one of the legislators there, and he's pushing hard. But we try to find allies in the governments that understand and want to learn more. We're making some inroads too in Japan, engaging with some of the other political parties. But again, it's slow. But going back to your question, like what really moves the needle, I think it's on the ground adoption. And I would say that includes stablecoin usage too, because that really shows the people and the governments that things have changed and you have to pay attention now, right? So if you look at Bolivia, they're pricing things in USDT on the shelves.
Wow.
And as the government, you kind of have to acknowledge, okay, something has changed, something is not working. We should pay attention, and maybe we should look at Bitcoin too. Another big catalyst for adoption that does move the needle, I think, is treasury companies like Strategy, MetaPlanet, and others like BSTR coming. But this is sort of a way that they can see Bitcoin's impact and they can't really deny it. So if you look at MetaPlanet, I don't think the Japanese government really took Bitcoin that seriously until MetaPlanet became the most traded stock with the highest volume and having their shareholder meetings overflowing. And this doesn't seem like a lot to Bitcoiners, but to get the attention of a government, that's kind of what is needed. It has to be very prevalent and very important and impacting directly with the financial markets that they care about. And that is really how you get a lot of attention. And I think this is why like some Bitcoiners don't like treasury companies, but I think they serve a very important role in that they're a forcing function for governments to really pay attention to Bitcoin and how it can have a positive impact.
That's a really interesting take, actually. We host a lot of spaces, and you're right. There is a pretty sharp divide on whether or not people like the treasury companies, and obviously, the price dictated most of that back and forth on whether or not they were good or not. And some of them have tanked pretty hard, and so people are like, obviously, it was a scam. We can done and dusted, move to the side, on to the next kind of thing. That's a really interesting take. Samson, I know you got to go here in a second. This will be my last question for you. I guess it's like a slightly two-pronged question, but like how are you spending most of your days? Is it in these meetings, or is it mainly with Jan3s? Like, is that where most of your time goes? And then second question, which may be a huge question, depends on how you take it. Someone might go as super esoteric and super deep with it. Some maybe just have something at the top of their head. But if there was one last message you could put out there, your ex is deleted tomorrow, you get deplatformed or something like that, what would be that one message you want to make sure people know, whether it's about Bitcoin, whether it's about something you learned about yourself that's more personal? Does anything come to mind?
Oh, let's see. I'll go with the first part first. So I spend a good part of my days on all the different companies I'm running. So Jan3 and Pixelmatic with Infinite Fleet.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I've been spending a lot of time on researching AI things and building systems around AI. I think that is an area that a lot of people are sleeping on. Like the advancements are happening so quickly. And we hired someone last year at Jan3 to implement a lot of new AI systems, AI-driven systems, to accelerate the development of Aqua. And we're hoping to announce something on that front soon. But there's just a lot of things happening, and I think the shift that's coming with the advent of AI workers is not something a lot of Bitcoiners are really actively thinking about, but they should. But it's funny because that also feeds into the thesis of why you want Bitcoin, right? So I would say AI is commoditizing work. It's becoming less so that you need to hire people rather than you need some work done and you need some output delivered. And if AI can substitute for that, then you're eliminating a lot of jobs that exist right now, but won't exist in the next few years. And if you think about that as a normal person that is thinking still like, I need a job, the next logical extension is I need an asset. Because if work is just a commodity, then it's the people that have assets that are going to be ahead, right? It's just like if you have real estate as an asset, you're making the real estate work for you.
Right.
You can leverage that asset, you can, generate income from that asset, but you have that sound asset. So even if you're not able to work, you have that asset to fall back on. And I think this is the part where a lot of normal people in the world are not thinking about, right? They may not be thinking even 2 steps ahead, or 1 step ahead even. But if you're going to lose your job, you probably want some asset. And I think the asset that you want is probably Bitcoin, because in the future, like, AI is going to transact using Bitcoin too. So you're going to have to pay for things in Bitcoin, especially if you go down the rabbit hole further and you understand the problems with fiat currency. So I guess the key takeaway here is that you have to constantly be reevaluating the world and seeing where we're at in terms of where things are going. And I would say normal people should probably, if you're worried about AI taking your job, you should start looking at Bitcoin, because that's the only real valuable thing that is left out there that cannot be printed or manipulated.
That's a very good way to put it. And I think it's a great message as well for people who are out there. Man, very cool. Is there any, before we sign off, is there anything that you want to shout out, last things you want to throw in there for the audience who's listening, anything that you're building or the companies you're building that are coming up, big announcements?
Yeah, we have an update for Aqua Wallet coming out soon. This is a major design revamp. We've redone the entire UI. And it's funny because we've been posting it on social media already, but we haven't released the build yet. We're just doing final testing. But we've added multi-wallet, so you can create multiple wallets inside one Aqua Wallet. And that is largely designed to work with the Samrock protocol, which is a way that people can connect their BTC-based stores easily with an Aqua Wallet and minimizing a lot of that setup. But yeah, it's a big update, and hopefully it'll be out in the next week or two, pending App Store approvals. But we're very excited about this release.
Very nice. Well, looking forward to it. And for everyone who's watching back at home, thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to give Samson a follow. I tagged him right above our faces. And also, if you enjoyed the stream and the podcast, be sure to repost it or quote tweet it, repost it, do all the things, tag a friend. And we'd love for this word to get out there. It's a great conversation, Samson. I appreciate you kind of opening up and sharing some of the perspectives you have, especially on the treasury front and the international side of things. It's just not something most people can speak to. So I really appreciate that. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. And everyone back at home, have a great day. We'll see you guys all in the next one. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Cage.